and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in London on Thursday for a 4-day trip to the United Kingdom, and his first as president. The UK and the U.S. have a historically close relationship. Prime Minister Theresa May is already under serious pressure on Brexit this week, and she is said to be viewed by Mr. Trump as a weak leader. The two have had a difficult relationship ever since he tweeted support for a far-right British activist group. Well, Mr. Trump's visit to the UK is short. Mrs. May will want to speak to him on various issues. Before the discussion, let's take a look at this.
It was a short but packed visit for Mr. Trump in the UK. On Thursday, Mrs. May hosted a black-tie dinner at Blenheim Palace, where World War II leader Winston Churchill was born and where other invited guests and business leaders attended. Mrs. May cited Churchill's legacy, saying the two countries share the most special of relationships with a long and proud history. On Friday, Mr. Trump visited the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to see firsthand some of Britain's cutting-edge military capabilities. After that, he had tea with Queen Elizabeth at Windsor Castle, then went one-on-one with Mrs. May at Chequers.
No two countries do more together than ours to keep their people safe and prosperous. And we want to deepen that cooperation even further to meet the shared challenges we face now and in the years ahead.
I also want to thank Prime Minister May for pursuing fair and reciprocal trade with the United States. Once the Brexit process is concluded and perhaps the UK has left the EU, I don't know what they're going to do, but whatever you do is okay with me. That's your decision.
Earlier this week, the British government has made public its blueprint for future trade relations with the European Union, outlining a detailed proposal for keeping a free trade zone for goods with the bloc. This controversial plan fueled a cabinet rebellion as Foreign Minister Boris Johnson and Brexit Secretary David Davis resigned. Meanwhile, many in Britain have been critical of Trump's policies, and protesters gathered in London to rally against the U.S. president's visit. The visit followed the NATO annual summit, with both Trump and May attending on Wednesday and Thursday in Brussels. The summit is being closely watched to determine the health of the so-called special relationship between the two countries.
To find out more about Trump's trip to the UK, we turn to our panel in Beijing. We have Mr. Rong Ying, who is the Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. And also joining us inside the UK, we have Professor Mike Bastin, coming from Southampton, from the University of Southampton. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. I want to start with you, Professor Bastin. How do those in Britain looking at this visit by President Trump?
I think it's going to be a very interesting visit. There's been unprecedented organization of protests. There's a lot of anger. It's fair to say that he's not the most popular US president in the UK. And there will be a real organized effort at protest. There's going to be an inflatable cartoon character that's going to be suspended above Westminster.
Yes.
The local government have allowed this for freedom of speech. That is unprecedented. Trump is unlikely to spend more than one night in London. He's going to be kept away from the protests. So it's like to see what actually materializes, but I think it's going to be a very, very lively time, and a lot of British people will vent quite serious venom and anger towards what they see as a reckless, irresponsible president.
Mr. Rong, this is an interesting time, isn't it? It's not only President Trump's visit to the UK and its tricky relationship with the European allies, but also the UK is going through its own version of chaos with the Brexit process now pretty much ups and down over the past few weeks. Mr. Rong.
Yes, it is a very interesting and a tricky moment for the bilateral relationship, and supposed to be the closest allies and a special relationship. Remember, I think this visit has been postponed. I think it's supposed to take place at the beginning of this year as a state visit. And later on, because of the perceived sort of protest from the Brits and then President Trump, and find a good excuse that he would not attend the launching of the new American embassy, criticizing President Obama and for a bad deal, and then now, but this visit has been, I would not say downgraded, but has been reframed as a working visit in the sense that reflecting the reality. But it is very interesting and a tricky moment, both for United States and for UK.
It is the national interest, isn't it, that both countries are looking for in each other. But the question is, have those common grounds really been growing or narrowing down? I guess that is the ultimate question people have to understand. Professor Bastian, think about the war in Iraq. The UK was one of the very few that would follow the United States in joining the forces. Of course, at that time, the U.S.-UK relationship was probably experiencing one of its highest points in recent decades. But since then, things have not been going very well. After all, that was a failed war. And after all, the Prime Minister was dragged down also by that war. So, Professor Bastian, how much is at stake, really, for the UK to be an extremely close ally of the United States as the U.S. credibility is going downside in the European countries, and also as the UK relationship with the United States potential not that clear?
It's not as clear as it used to be. You're right. The Bush administration, Bush Jr., Bush Sr. were very close personally to Blair and then Prime Minister John Major, and that cemented what could have been generally described as a special relationship. Since then, things have deteriorated. Trump obviously is a very, very different character. He's not necessarily looking to the UK as a major ally and a sort of bridge into Europe. And it's coming at the time when the UK really does need the US more than the US perhaps needs the UK, or both need each other. Obviously with Brexit, the US being a major economy, still very powerful, major trading partner, some sort of trade deal with the US is more important than ever. But the characters involved, Theresa May and Donald Trump, haven't really warmed to each other. There hasn't been a special relationship. Trump didn't go to the UK, he went to Germany, he's gone to all sorts of other countries, the Middle East, other regions, China, and hasn't been to the UK and hasn't really seemed to want to go to the UK. So there is a lot at stake, and hopefully this trip for both partners can cement some sort of better relationship.
A lot of stake for the UK, possibly, but what about for Washington? In Washington, D.C., we're joined on the phone by Basima El-Hussein, political analyst at the Truman National Security Project and also former Obama White House appointed advisor. I want to ask you with the same question. How relevant is the UK now, Ms. El-Hussein, to the United States when you think about Trump administration's priorities?
I think that the United Kingdom is extremely relevant to the Trump administration's priorities, especially in light of the fact of the increasing tensions with our traditional NATO allies. I think it's particularly important for the Trump administration to demonstrate to his domestic base that he's able to have strong relationships with key allies abroad. And as we know, as the trade war escalates between the United States and China, it will be important for President Trump to attempt to claim some wins in the trade space. And so we know that one of the ideas that they have been floating between the UK and the United States is this concept of a bilateral trade deal. And casually, the ambassador, Woody Johnson, the U.S. ambassador to the UK, has said that it's possible that President Trump would pursue a zero tariffs policy with the United Kingdom.
But Ms. El-Hussein, if you think about that, about China-U.S. trade war apparently going on there, the UK is one of those very first European countries actually to join AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is closely related to the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, proposed originally by China to create connectivity around the world. So how much Is the UK likely to follow the US way when it comes to economic and trade terms? That is a big question mark.
I don't think that the UK would be smart to follow in President Trump's hostile trade policies towards China. I would envision that they will not do that, but I do feel that it creates an opportunity for UK-US trade relations, because as trade is hurt from China, it will have to be improved in other areas. And so we've seen certain industries already hurt by the tariffs imposed by the United States and then the retaliatory tariffs imposed by China. And whereas on the other hand, we've seen some different industries claim some gains. And so I think there is a lot of uncertainty right now when it comes to the efficacy of these trade policies. And so it will be very important for President Trump to point to some wins. And I think the United Kingdom potentially offers an opportunity to provide those wins. But as my colleagues in Great Britain were discussing earlier, there's a lot of tension within the UK government, as we know.
Right.
Boris Johnson stepped down, as we know. I think David Davies stepped down as well, the Brexit secretary. And so there's a lot of turmoil there. We're going to have to see how it plays out. But President Trump and Theresa May both ran on increased sense of nationalism and sovereignty, and I think it's important for both of them to demonstrate to their bases that they're able to deliver on that, or that those policies provide net gains to their respective countries.
All right, thank you so much. Basima El Hussein joining us from Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it. I want to come back to you, Professor Bastian, about that question. Apparently, both the UK and the United States is proposing they want to do things less multilaterally, more bilaterally, with the UK voters 52% suggesting Brexit a few months ago. So do you think the UK version of it is similar to that of Donald Trump's, or they are actually very different in logic and content? Professor Bastian.
I think the latter. I think they are very, very different. Whilst about a slim majority of British people voted for Brexit, I don't think they were voting against multilateralism. I don't think they were voting against, for example, retaining membership of the customs union. I think an overwhelming majority of British people and the majority of British members of Parliament would still want to be part of this customs union. So I don't think it's the same as Trump's war on trade, his very public protectionist policies claiming to represent the American worker, and that America is paying too much, particularly into NATO. I think that the British people really do want to see the continuation of multilateralism. I think they're very much with China and with other European Union nations. But as has been said by your panelists and others, there is tremendous turmoil here now in government, and it really is very, very difficult to see whether or not there will be some sort of multilateral-based trade deal with the European Union going forward. There could well be complete carnage and no deal at all. That is a very real possibility, but it's not what the British people want.
Yeah, well, but that is the reality, isn't it, Mr. Rong? If you think about that, there are a lot of uncertainties. Nobody has figured out what the plan could be or what the roadmap could be, not even what the ideas could be like, the potential or the dream could be like. So with all of these uncertainties, what is the point of going in depth for talks about whatever system, whether it's political or economic and trade orders? Will the different sides, with their very limited capabilities and big vulnerability, be able to figure out anything? Even if they figure it out, would that work at all for the future, Mr. Rong?
Yeah, I think talking about the, I would like to come back to the special relationship between the United States and the UK. That reminds me of a story that during the war on Iraq, I think Tony Blair was criticized by following blindly with the United States, and then he defended and argued that he was actually playing a role of a guide dog to guide the United States from going astray. So now I think we have President Trump, and it seems that he's going astray again. And I don't know how far this special relationship or how far UK is going to play. But coming back to the multilateralism, the debate about multilateralism and unilateralism, I think it has been very clear, UK together with China and others, we all for multilateralism. And so even though I think given the special relationship between UK and the United States, I don't see that the UK can benefit more from the United States through bilaterally than multilaterally.
Interesting thought over there. Professor Bastian, you would agree?
I think so. I think, again, it does come back to characters. It shouldn't really. You think that it would all be about detail and policy, but I think Blair had a presence, and I'm not a particularly big fan of Blair or Theresa May, but Blair had a presence, a charisma on the world stage, and in effect he did lead Bush, I think, and that did lead to a closer relationship. Theresa May doesn't have that at all. She doesn't have a mandate even from her own party, let alone the people. So I can't see why these talks can go into any depth at all. They're just presentational, cosmetic, but it can still send a very positive, a more positive signal about the future relationship, trade relationship between the UK and the US, which is very, very important. That image is important.
But also to the UK, to what extent will this trip give Theresa May, the current cabinet, which is now being very much challenged by the personnel change, a boost in her stability politically and also in the cabinet's approach about the Brexit plan?
Well, she'll see it as a welcome diversion. It will grab a lot of attention, and it will take attention away from, obviously, Brexit and the recent resignations. And it depends how she handles it. If she presents herself well, it will give her a boost. It will make her look more prime ministerial. It will temporarily put her on the world stage, and she could forge a much better image internationally. And Tony Blair was very good at that. So if she can do that successfully, and that may well be the case, then it could give her a temporary boost. But it's very, very difficult to see a way out in the Conservative Party. There are irreversible, irrevocable divisions there on policy when it comes to Brexit and this customs union. She's presenting a very, very watered down Brexit, and that just will not fit. That just will not be accepted by a large percentage of her party.
Right.
And so it remains to be seen how strong she can be for much longer.
It is not the very first time for people to see that the United States and the UK leaders are not necessarily very much close, as it has been demonstrated in some of the previous occasions, whether it is G20, it's G7, and some of the other occasions as well. Given President Trump's personal style, which is more than straightforward, and which is quite skeptical about the other leaders from different parts of the world, as long as there's any minor disagreement between them. Will Prime Minister May gaining points, or rather, while the courtyard or the backyard already burning, she has to pretend a pretty smile in front of the U.S. President, Professor Bastian?
She really is an invidious position and situation here. I suspect she's very, very aware of the British public and their feeling towards Trump and his administration, and on that she may act a little bit tougher and a bit more direct than usual. She was very outspoken about his performance at the most recent summit in Canada, and used very, very strong language, unusually sort of undiplomatic language about him not being very, very useful. His policy in moving the British embassy, the American embassy, sorry, to Jerusalem, she's been very outspoken there. So we may see quite an outspoken Theresa May, who is quite willing to go on record publicly with differences and a strong approach and a robust representation to Trump. That may well be an unusual outcome, and that may give her a boost.
Very interestingly so, possibly. Mr. Rong, the issue of Russia is also a very tricky one. I mean, the European allies of the United States do not necessarily see eye to eye with Russia. That we all know very well. Donald Trump, though, since his campaign has been talking softly to Russia, but recently tough to Russia as a result of the internal politics, but he's still going to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin after Vladimir Putin came into the office for this round. So how do you read the relationship with Russia is likely to play its role in the meeting between the UK and the US this time?
Yeah, it is very interesting going to see, because as we have just discussed that the visit to UK will be sort of remembered by the widespread protests and other interesting things. While for President Trump, as he tweeted that the meeting with President Putin is going to be the easiest part. So that raised a concern of the European media that if the NATO summit ended with acrimony, while the meeting with President Putin and with mutual admiration, that would be a big problem for the relationship across the Atlantic. And that would also raise many more questions about the alliances itself.
Having said all of this, gentlemen, really we are talking about two issues. One is whether the value system commonly shared between the UK and the United States are actually getting ever narrowed down. And the other thing is, what about the practicality of the two countries dealing with one another? What real benefits will they get? Before we go, I want to have some final thoughts from both of you. Mr. Rong, you want to go first, briefly?
Yeah, I think for President Trump, it seems that values is at least not as much important as interest. But the pursuit interest of the United States in a unilateral way, that would, I think, not necessarily serve the best interest of the United States, even though the politics of the United States seems to go along this line.
Right. What about that UK-US relationship along the lines of value systems and pragmatic issues, Professor Bastian?
In terms of value systems, if we're talking about cultural values, national values, the UK is still probably far closer to the US and vice versa than other European nations in terms of freedom, individualism, family orientation, and obviously to a certain extent religion. Obviously the US is still far more Christian. So I think that's still the case, but I don't think it's getting closer. In terms of those values and multilateralism versus unilateralism, the issue first and foremost is that the UK doesn't have a clear position. Now there's an element within the Brexiteer wing within the Conservative Party are very, very much aligned to Trump, and they're very, very similar in going it alone, unilateralism, bilateral trade deals, and the freedom they think that will bring. Theresa May and the soft Brexiteers, the Remainers, and Theresa May was a Remainer, let's remember she voted Remain, have a very, very different view of the world. It's almost two parties in one, where they favour multilateralism, they favour a customs union and cohesion, integration, a globalization that's brought us a lot of wealth. So I don't think, it remains to be seen what happens in the British government. I think that's the key issue that we need to look at, and who actually wins out. It should be the Remainers and the soft Brexiteers, because that's really the will of the British people. But what remains to be seen, because the Brexiteers are extremely passionate and organised and determined.
It remains to be seen, probably for quite a long time to go. Thank you so much for both of you, Rong Ying, Mike Bastian. Really appreciate it.